क्या मना था तुम्हारा कनेक्ट?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yasin wal Qur'anil Hakim innaka laminal mursalin ala siratim mustaqim tanzilal azizir rahim لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yasin wal Qur'anil Hakim innaka laminal mursalin ala siratim mustaqim tanzilal azizir rahim litunzira qauman ma unzira aba'uhum fahum ghafilun لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين وضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أذل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحيي الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وضل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب ذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرة ولا لقبائه ساترة ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء عقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرت بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد عملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفزحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا إلهي ورب من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمره إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض هدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاءك وألزمني حكمك وبلاءك وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مكرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعتي من رحمتك اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شدي وفاكي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي، يا من بدا خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذب بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته أو تبعد من عدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مادحة وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة وعلى ضمائر أحوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعت الأوطان تعبدك طائية وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم. يا ربي وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوه يسير بقاه قصير مدته. فكيف احتمال لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الضليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولم منها ضج وأبكي لأليم العذاب وشدته أملت للبلاء مدته. فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك. أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجاء عفوك. فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقة لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولو نادينك إن كنت يا ولي المؤمنين. يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وضاقت أعماضا بها بمعصيته وحبس بين أتباكها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يضج إليك ضجيجا مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك، أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك، أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه، أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه، أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه، أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه، أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات. ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين يقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاهدك وقضيت به من إخلاد معاندك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كانت لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأن تجلى ثناؤك، قلت مبتدعا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرمة، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم نجرمته وكل ذنب ذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جواره، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفر خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدة، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدة. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، قوي على خدمتك جوارح واشدد على العزيمة جوانح، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في البارزين وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فارد ومن كادني فقد واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك، وجد لي بجودك وعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجة، وقلبي بحبك متيمة ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقل أثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة وإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النكم يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد التماس دعاء
محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اکبر تمہیں معلوم ہے کیا مانگ رہے ہو، تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو، اس عالم غربت میں تمہیں جانے دوں کیسے، اس دشت مصیبت میں تمہیں جانے دوں کیسے، اس وقت قیامت میں تمہیں جانے دوں کیسے، اے لال جو تم اذن وگاہ مانگ رہے ہو، تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو، کیا گزرے گی اس باپ کے دل پر نہیں سوچا، تم نے یہ میری جان علی اکبر نہیں سوچا، مر جاؤں گا میں تجھ سے بچھڑ کر نہیں سوچا، تم مجھ سے ضعیفی کا سا مانگ رہے ہو، تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو، دل روتا ہے نظروں سے اگر دور ہو بیٹا، کس طرح جدائی تیری منظور ہو بیٹا، تم ہی میری آنکھیں ہو میرا نور ہو بیٹا، مجھ سے میری آنکھوں کی ضیا مانگ رہے ہو، تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو، دنیا سے گیا جس گھری محبوب خدا کا، نانا کی زیارت کو تڑپتا تھا نواسا، اے لال تجھے اس لیے خالق سے تھا مانگا، مقبول ہوئی میری دعا مانگ رہے ہو، تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو۔ ایک روز تجھے آن کے مانگا تھا پھوپھی نے، 18 برس نازوں سے پالا تھا پھوپھی نے، بیٹوں سے بھی زیادہ تمہیں چاہا تھا پھوپھی نے، احسان جو زینب نے کیا مانگ رہے ہو، تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو۔ سر تیرا بھی جس وقت چڑھے گا سر نیزا، ہوگا سر میدان جدا سر بھی تمہارا، ہم شکل پیمبر کا گلا کاٹیں گے آدھا، گویا میرے نانا کا گلا مانگ رہے ہو، تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو۔ بابا مجھے معلوم ہے کیا مانگ رہا ہوں، ایک باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہا ہوں۔ بابا مجھے اماں نے بھی کچھ درس دیا ہے، آداب وفا سے مجھے آگاہ کیا ہے، پہلے میں مروں آپ سے وعدہ یہ لیا ہے، بس اس لیے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہا ہوں، ایک باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہا ہوں۔ اکبر تمہیں معلوم ہے کیا مانگ رہے ہو، تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو۔ سورۃ المبارکۃ الفاتحہ۔
محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد۔ تیر سینے میں ہے اور ذہن میں یاد سہرا، سامنے باپ ہے آنکھوں میں لہو روتا، کھینچنا تیر ہے سینے سے، سخت ہے لمحہ، سننے والوں جو سن سکو تو سنو یہ نوحہ اکبر کی شہادت، اے مومنو سنو اکبر کی شہادت، اے مومنو سنو اکبر کی شہادت۔ عاشور کا دن رخصت اکبر کی گھڑی ہے، تیار رواں ہونے کو ہم شکل نبی ہے، لیلا بھی ہے زینب بھی کھڑی دیکھ رہی ہے، سرور کے لیے ہائے قیامت یہ بڑی ہے، ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر۔ یاد آتا ہے سرور کا وہ اکبر کا بتانا، ہم آل محمد کا یہ دشمن ہے زمانہ، اے نور نظر ڈھال نہ سینے سے ہٹانا، نیزوں سے تم اس چاند سے سینے کو بچانا، اے مومنو سنو اکبر کی شہادت، کس طرح سے بتلاؤں جگر پھٹتا ہے میرا، اکبر جو چلے رن تو قیامت کا سما تھا، اکبر نے بھی مڑ مڑ کے کئی بار یہ دیکھا، رو رو کے مجھے دیکھ رہے ہیں میرے بابا، مقتل میں جو پہنچا تو قیامت ہوئی برپا، دشمن کی قضا بن گیا غازی کا بھتیجا، اتنے میں ہوا سینے پہ ایک وار سنا کا، گھوڑے سے گرا خاک پہ شبیر کا بیٹا، ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر۔ اکبر کی صدا سن کے جو شبیر چلے ہیں، رستے میں کئی بار گرے اور اٹھے ہیں، رستہ وہ بسر کر کے جو دل پر سے ملے ہیں، شدت سے تڑپتا ہے بسر دیکھ رہے ہیں، اے مومنو سنو اکبر کی شہادت۔ بیٹے سے کہا باپ نے اتنا تو بتاؤ، کیوں ہاتھ ہے سینے پہ رکھا ہاتھ ہٹاؤ، بابا کو بس ایک بار یہ سینہ تو دکھاؤ، اے راحت جاں باپ کو ایسے نہ رلاؤ، اکبر نے کلیجے سے وہ جب ہاتھ ہٹایا، منظر وہ دل زہرا نے کس طرح سے دیکھا، پیوست کلیجے میں تھا ٹوٹا ہوا نیزہ، سرور کا لہو سینہ اکبر سے رواں تھا، اے مومنو سنو اکبر کی شہادت۔ سرور نے لرزتے ہوئے ہاتھوں کو بڑھایا، برچی پہ کبھی رکھ کا کبھی رکھ کے اٹھایا، دریا کی طرف دیکھ کے غازی کو بلایا، کیا وقت قیامت کا یہ شبیر پہ آیا، سینے کی طرف دیکھا پھر ایک بار پلٹ گئے، یا بابا مدد کہہ کے رکھا ہاتھ سنا پر، برچی جو نکالی تو تڑپنے لگے اکبر، بیٹے کی طرف دیکھ کے رونے لگے سرور، ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر، کس طرح اٹھا شاہ سے جوان لال کلاشا، مت پوچھو عزادارو قیامت کا لمحہ تھا، بیٹے کی مدد کرنے کو خود آ گئی زہرا، یہ عرش و زمین دیکھ کے کرنے لگے نوحہ، ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر، نوحہ ہے یہی عاصم و ذیشان کے لب پر، خیموں میں حسین آئے جو لاشے کو اٹھا کر، سادات کے خیموں میں قیامت کا تھا منظر، جس وقت کہا شاہ نے مارا گیا اکبر، ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر ہائے اکبر، اے مومنو سنو اکبر کی شہادت، اے مومنو سنو اکبر کی شہادت، صلوات علی محمد وآل محمد، اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرمائے. Let us recite the ayah of Amayajibu 5 times. For all those who may be facing any kind of difficulties or hardships, whether it be war, whether it be finance, health, or any other kind of hardship. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء، 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. Let us recite Surah Fatiha for all the marhumin of everybody who's watching. Bil Khusus Marhum Asghar Ali Hasnavi, who passed away 1 year from today. So it's Mubarak al-Fatiha. ختم الأنبياء محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بر علي وأولاد علي بآواز بلند صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
رحم الله من قال سورة الله على الفاتحة. بسم الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زين مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, in our little town and across the globe, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Question: can I be happy in this world and in the hereafter? Keep that question in the back of your mind. We've been discussing the concept of a worldview, and we've been saying that in the past few nights, we've been highlighting this idea that the worldview that you and I have may not be our own. It may have been imposed upon us, whether we realize it or not, either intellectually, either academically, either socially, or otherwise. The things that we hear in society, not only now, but in the past, every little detail of life has an impact on us, whether we realize it or not. The friends that we keep have an impact on us. The company we keep has an impact on us. The place you live has an impact on you, whether you realize it or not. The time in which you live has an impact on you, as well, whether you realize it or not. Therefore, we are coming towards the culmination of our nights, and in this environment, it makes sense to speak about some of the most important aspects of life that are common amongst human beings on this planet. And the topic of discussion tonight may be something that you may not think is related to these nights in particular. It may seem counterintuitive, but rather it gets at the essence of everything and the essence of being. Part and parcel of a worldview is with respect to how do I view the world in terms of its objectives. What's my goal in this life? What's my goal to achieve something in the hereafter? Is that even a goal of mine or not? Therefore, the topic of discussion tonight that we are going to be looking at is the issue of happiness in Islamic thought. Has Islam commented on this? That is, when you look at the various philosophers of the world, they've looked at this topic. When you look at, for example, the different religions of the world, for example, Buddhism and others, they are striving to achieve states such as nirvana and others, to ultimately have happiness in their life. With respect to Islam, this fundamental element of human existence, has Islam commented on it? And is it that our concept and our conception of happiness is aligned with and in tune with what Islam says? Or is it not? And if it's not, then how can I correct myself so that I actually have the Quranic the prophetic and the Islamic understanding and worldview of what happiness really is in life. In order to understand this, I want this to be very clear. The data that is coming out, and in particular in an environment in a world based on COVID where we are living in, the data since 2010 has been showing consistently that happiness in America and in developed countries is declining. And therefore, we come to realize that although we have so many benefits in our modern world, there are still some things that are missing. I want to highlight, for example, one study that was conducted at Dartmouth College. Dartmouth College, which is an Ivy League institution, one of the premier institutions in the United States. Researchers at Dartmouth College wanted to see when is it in a human being's life, in a developed or a developing economy, when an individual is happiest, and when is it when they are the least happy, or the saddest, one may say. And what is the trend, if there's any trend? They found a very interesting trend. They found that at the age of 18 in developed and developing economies, so this would include North America as well as Europe and many developing economies across the world, they found that at the age of 18, one's happiness peaks. But what happens afterwards is very interesting. They found that after the age of 18, there's an inverted U-shaped curve that emerges. What is an inverted U-shaped curve? It's literally a curve, a U that's upside down. And you find that happiness begins to decline. So at the age of 20, someone is relatively happy. But as the decade progresses towards the age of 30, the researchers at Dartmouth argue, based on thousands of data points in hundreds of countries, not small sets of data, we're talking about very vast amounts of data across all of these, they found from the age of 20 to the age of 30, in not underdeveloped economies, not poor countries, I should say, but countries that are developed themselves or developing, the decade from 20 to 30, people's happiness goes down. And from the decade from 30 to 40, their happiness goes down even further. I thought a developed economy is supposed to be a happy society. What's going on here? This trend was in both, by the way. I'm not against progress. I'm not against development. I'm sharing what the data says. By the way, development has many benefits, which I've alluded to in previous things. I won't discuss here. What did the researchers say further? They found what is that time period in an individual's life, in a developing or a developed economy, where they are at the highest level of unhappiness, meaning they're the saddest in their life. They found that in developed economies, it's the age of 47, and in developing economies, it's the age of 48. What does that tell you? What does that tell me about our world? What's going on that someone's unhappiness, that is the sadness of their life, is at its height at the age of 48, 47, 48 years of age? Do you know when you get back to the happiness of age 18 in a developed economy? You don't get back to that level of happiness, the peak at the age of 18. You have to get up to the age of 65, what would be retirement age, then your happiness emerges again. Why this is, there are various views amongst sociologists and psychologists. For example, one therapist who actually deals with this in Silicon Valley, they said that 47, 48 is that age where someone is making the transition through middle management. And what ends up happening is they feel like there's an emptiness in their life. There's a lack of meaning. That when they were someone who's a lower level employee and now they're going into middle management or, for example, the level of senior manager, director, X, Y, and Z, there's a sense of meaninglessness and added stress that comes with it. It really emphasizes getting a halal sustenance for your family. But we're finding our modern world is devoid of meaning. Therefore, I want to understand, what does Islam say about this issue? How is it that I can have this dunya and the akhirah, if that's even a goal that I should have? Because the data is becoming very clear that our world, because of the lack of meaning, we're becoming very, very less happy. Another argument that researchers say is, the Dartmouth researchers themselves say, is when you're 18, you have idealistic perspectives. You're very hopeful about the world. And what ends up happening eventually is, as you get into your decade of the 20s to the 30s, you begin to see that the world is not what you imagined it to be. That those dreams and those aspirations that you had are not necessarily those that you may be attaining. And as you go from 30 to 40, this becomes more and more well known. I say this because the midlife crisis, or now the quarter life crisis, is a well known concept. That when someone is in their 40s, it was well known that people have crisis. They just didn't have data to support it. Or for example, at the age of in the middle 20s or 25, there's a quarter life crisis now. Now, In the brief moments that we have together, I want to very quickly go through a few stages of analysis. Number one, what is it that the philosophers have said about the issue of happiness and how it relates to you and I? Number two, what has, for example, other religions said about this topic? Number three, what does the Quran actually say about this? And how can I derive the timeless jewels that give me tranquility in my heart and mind from the Quran al-Majid wal Quran al-Hamid? The fourth level is the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. What have the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam said with respect to how you and I can get happiness in our life, in this world and in the next? And finally, what was it in the heart of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam Abi Abdullah al-Hussein, and his relationship to happiness? Did he comment on this? And how did we see this in his actions on the plains of Karbala? These are the 5 stages of analysis we'll look at this topic, inshallah, so we have better answers to the largest questions in life. Wherever you are, here in Allentown or across the globe, from the bottom of your heart, send us salawat Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Lincoln, the president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, has a famous quote where he says, folks or people are generally as happy as they make their mind up to be. This make their keep that as well as the back of your mind, as this will come up again. When we come to the philosophers, Epicurus is a Greek philosopher who's focused particularly on this issue of happiness. And he analyzed people in society. In his writings, you'll find that what he said and his society 2,000 years ago was not very different than our society today. Why? Because the Quran tells us itself that the fitra, the nature of human beings, doesn't change. That there are the same wants that we have today existed at that time. The same desires that we have today, they had at that time. And the same things that we think will make us happy today were the same things thought would make them happy 2,000 years ago. And yet those same things didn't make them happy. And Epicurus realized this 2,000 years ago. I say this because I don't want our next generation to live their 20s to 30s, their 30s to 40s, their 40s to 50s in a state of unhappiness. Why would 30 years of one life? That's a long time. 30 years of your life living in a state of being untranquil? Does that make sense? And I already gave you the parable of the man by the sea the few nights ago, if you recall. The parable of the man by the sea was that man who's sitting by the seashore, and a man passes by. He says, what are you doing? It's the middle of the week, as we would say. It's noon on a Wednesday, for example, or it's 11 on a Wednesday. What are you doing sitting here by the sea? You should be working. You should be tilling. You should be doing something, looking after your sheep, earning a livelihood. What are you doing sitting by the sea? He says, why do I need to work? What do I need to do that for? He says, well, when you work, you earn income. When you earn income, then he said, why do I want to earn income? Why do I want to save? He says, when you do this, then eventually you'll accumulate enough income that one day you can do whatever you want. The man by the sea just looks right back at him and says, well, I'm doing that now anyways. I'm doing what I want. So why are you going to go through that difficulty? There has to be something bigger. There has to be something useful. There has to be something of meaning that must exist in one's life. That's what we're here to explore. Epicurus found that people thought that, for example, having romance in their life or love in their life, for example, what they thought was love, by the way, relationships with a significant other would make someone happy. But he said, for example, I've noticed many people who are married or with their significant others in that time, the Greek time, 2,000 years ago, they're very unhappy. They're not happy. So he said, for example, that was one level. The next level, he said that I thought that maybe people in society were saying that if you have lots of wealth, lots of money, you will be very happy. I mentioned 2 nights ago, if you remember, the Islamic concept of wealth is development. You should earn, but the earning you do is not necessarily for example, having luxuries and making other people think that you're a big deal. No, the income and the idea of money in Islam is to earn a substantial amount. The way Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen did, the way Imam Hassan did, the way all the Imams did, for example, Imam Hussein, Imam Baqir, Imam Sadiq, Imam Sajjad, with the exception of Imam Qadim and some other Imams who the circumstance didn't allow, but they used that income for development. This is the same thing that happened in the beginning of a beautiful philosophy. America was built by Calvinist Protestants who had a belief. Their belief was that in order to go to heaven, you have to be someone, they believed in predestination, the tulip model. And they said all the people who are going to heaven are already predetermined. So they were looking for signs, who's a Jannati, who's going to heaven. And they said that the person who's doing good for their community through their business and investing that income into the community, that's a Jannati, that's a person who's going to heaven. It was a beautiful philosophy. Islam has this philosophy through the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Going back to Epicurus, he said, but I think that people think that money will automatically make them happy. He said that's not the case. He says something else may be the cause of their happiness. The third thing he says was people would think that, for example, they have to have luxuries in their life or things that other people don't have in order to be happy. He concluded, Epicurus, this is philosophy. He says that you don't need all of these things. He says, number one, what do you need? He says you need to, for example, have good friends. Mark this word friends, it will come up later when we look at the Islamic perspective. That if you have good friends, close friends, that's much more important than anything else. What else do you need? This is his view. The next thing you need is you don't necessarily need a lot of income, but he says you need autonomy. What does autonomy mean? It means self-sufficiency, meaning that you are not dependent on anyone else. You are not reliant on anyone. And the third level, he said, was rather than luxuries in life, one needs self-reflection, meditation, contemplation, thinking about reality and thinking about the world to get peace of mind. Remember what Lincoln said. Lincoln understood that peace starts here, happiness starts in the mind and permeates through the heart. Therefore, in society, there were 400,000 Epicurean civilizations that came up, that rose up. These were places where people lived with their friends, and they also, for example, they lived a life with following those principles. You know the monasteries that churches have? When Christianity expanded, they took over the Epicurean communities and made them monasteries. That's its historical background. But now I want to come to Buddhism. Mark these words. Buddhism, which is a philosophy that has become very popular in America, it's become very popular in the West. Why? Because the idea within Buddhism is that you can somehow get satisfaction without God, or you don't necessarily need God. This idea that I'm able to have a peaceful life. That's why many Silicon Valley executives and many people in technology and many people in the modern world love this concept of Buddhism. I want to share with you what the Dalai Lama said. The Dalai Lama, who's the head of Buddhism, the Tibetan Buddhism. He says, a friend of mine tells me that in Islam, there's a concept called jihad. Not my words, the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, who's alive right now. He says, my friend tells me that Islam's concept has a concept called jihad, but it's not the concept that we hear on the news. He says the bigger jihad, the bigger struggle, is the struggle with the self. And when he explained that to me, he said, tell me more. The Dalai Lama is saying, tell me more about that. He says the real struggle, according to the Prophet's words, when a group came back from the struggle, which was the minor struggle, when they came back from the battlefield, when they came back to Medina, he says, congratulations to those who are coming back from the minor struggle and coming towards the major struggle. Remember, the Quran doesn't have the word holy war in it. For all the media you may have heard, it doesn't exist. Jihad stems from the root word juhud, which literally means struggle. So Rasulullah is saying, congratulations to the one who have come back from the minor struggle towards the major struggle. They said, Ya Rasulullah, what is the major struggle? What is the minor? The minor is the battlefield, the major is the self. The Dalai Lama said, if that's the case, then the Islamic concept of jihad encapsulates all of Buddhism. Meaning Buddhism is nothing more than the concept of jihad in Islam. That is, to control oneself is what leads to the concept of nirvana, or beyond that, self-tranquility or enlightenment. Understand this concept. When we come to the Islamic concept, what does Islam say on this topic? Because many people may come forward and say that it's such a big thing that our world, we're striving towards the concept of trying to be happy and tranquil in life, and we're not getting it based on the data. Islam surely must have said something about this. Certainly it does. When we go to the Quran al-Majid wal-Furqan al-Hamid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly and categorically says numerous times, for example, he uses the term Sa'id or Sa'ida. This is an example of happiness in this world and in the hereafter. Sa'id or Sa'ida, the root word, for example, if you know someone by the name of Mas'ud, for example, that comes from the same root word as Sa'id. What's another term that the Quran al-Majid wal-Furqan al-Hamid has used for happiness? Keep this in mind. We should be careful about how we use the term. Terms need to be defined. Why? Because if someone hears happiness, they may think hedonism, which many people in our modern world think of. We live in times, sometimes people have argued, in hedonistic society. Hedonistic society is one which maximizes pleasure. It tries to always be happy at all moments through maximizing pleasure. That's not what Islam's idea is. Islam's concept or notion of happiness is more in depth. So one term is Sa'id or Sa'ida that's used in the Quran. Another term that is used in the Quran al-Majid wal-Furqan al-Hamid is farah. Farah, remember that one, it will come in the tradition of the Prophet in a moment. Farha is a type of joy that one has in their life. This is another type. Another word or root word that is used in the Quran for happiness is radi or radi, which is the root for many words such as radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. You know, our brothers in Ahlul Sunnah, for example, they say when they hear the name of a companion, they say radiyallahu an. That derives from the verse of the Quran, radiyallahu an wa radu an. That is, those people, Allah is pleased with them. Same concept within that. Also, Ridwan in Jannah, in paradise, one of the highest stations and the highest names of Jannah is Ridwan. It stems from the same very word. But I want to come to Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. These verses that I recited at the beginning of the lecture was on this topic. Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'in. Surah al-Fajr. Surah al-Fajr is also in our hadith has been called as Surah al-Husayn. That is the chapter of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, because its beginning and its end is directly connected in the tafsir to Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. Because someone may ask, where is Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam in the Quran? You need to look no further than Surah al-Fajr. But you can also give other examples, Surah Dahar, Surah Insan, and the likes. We won't get into that, Mubahila and all those. In Surah al-Fajr, Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya. O soul that are at rest, the Quran says. O soul, one may ask as a footnote that Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam was physically, for example, Karbala had not happened. There are discussions on the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam about the nuzul of this. The first revelation, second revelation, the layers of meaning. We don't have time to go in that. But this is clear from the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam that these verses are referring to Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya. O soul that is at rest, come back to your Lord in a state of radha, where you are satisfied with Him and He is satisfied with you. Now keep in mind, language, we mentioned poetry the night before. Language, there's a saying in Italian that all translation is treason. All translation is treason. Because as soon as you translate something, it loses its true essence. If, for example, some poetry is written in Urdu, you can try as much as you want to, for example, translate into English, and that's a good endeavor, but you won't get the original meaning. The same with the Quran and Majid. You try to translate the Quran from Arabic to English. It will do something for you. I'm not saying it's not going to do anything, but we have 18, 19, 20 different translations of the Quran in English, last I checked, and they're still going. And it will take a long time, in fact, forever to get to the point of the Quran. All translations are treason because some element will be lost. When we talk about radha, we have to use numerous words in different languages to try to explain what the Quran is saying with respect to radha. But this, Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya, where you are satisfied with your Lord and your Lord is satisfied with you, most importantly. Referring to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. I asked you, was Imam Hussein alayhi salam pleased on the plains of Karbala? Tragedy after tragedy, say the Shuhada is going through. What's going through his heart? If you ask the mystics, the ulama, the scholars, although he was going through external difficulty after difficulty, his heart was at ease and peace, despite the difficulty. How? Why? You know, you imagine, you and I, we work day and night, for example. We have difficulties, someone gets sick, there's a global pandemic going on that's driving our minds insane. The data that I'm reading on this, it's catastrophic. That already our society was making us unhappy. On top of that, we're in an environment of uncertainty, coupled with, for example, this idea of what is going to happen, fear. These two things combined. And then on isolation. You know how terrible this is for the human mind? The research is very alarming right now. I'm not trying to make anyone afraid. I'm just trying to say, I'm getting messages, and many of our brethren are getting messages, for example, who work in community development. Divorces on the rise, for example. Arguments in families on the rise. All of these things are not happening in isolation, they're happening globally. So recognize what's happening. Uncertainty. In American law and in Western law, there's the concept that you have a right to a swift and speedy trial. Why? Because if you don't know what the verdict of your trial is going to be, that's a form of torture. Because the uncertainty is unbearable. What's going to happen? Well, I need to get on with my life. Uncertainty. And what's the worst form of punishment someone can get in prison? It's something called solitary confinement. When you are placed in a cell by yourself with no one else. That is something that can lead to, in fact, some have argued that's a form of torture. To be in isolation by yourself for an extended period of time. So imagine coupling those two together. Uncertainty about the future, and on top of that adding isolation and fear. It becomes a pressure cooker that bursts. Be cognizant and mindful of what's going on in your life. Don't look at, for example, nitpick at little things. People are on edge right now. You go to the store, you go to the market, people are on edge. Don't argue with people. That sanity level is not at the normal levels. You are seeing this as much as I'm seeing this. This is the world we're living in. Sayyid al-Shuhada, despite everything that's going on around him, he has tranquility in his heart. Otherwise, why would the Quran say that? Soul that is at rest, return to your Lord. It's highlighting this reality that no matter what happened to him, he had peace. Why? Because his heart was filled with Allah's love. That's the root. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, in tradition says, I sat at the gate of my heart and guarded it, and I did not let anyone in except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's where the tranquility comes. That although he saw hardship after hardship, he was able to endure. Same with the Holy Prophet. Endurance, tranquility is where true happiness lies. But there's other things that you and I can implement. What are those? When we come to this idea, remember the word was rada. That's the third level. Islam also in the Quran, it explained the opposite of happiness to describe happiness. Well, for example, what? The opposite of happiness being the word huzn. You remember when Rasulullah lost Abu Talib alayhi salam and Lady Khadija salamullahi alayha in the same year, it was called Amul Huzn. That is the year of sorrow. The Quran says the same thing. Of Allah, the ones who are close to Allah, they will be what? La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. That they will have nothing to fear and they will have no sorrow. That is, that Allah is saying that you will have peace and tranquility, creating the opposite of happiness. So he's saying huzn, where you see huzn, that's not happiness in the Quranic definition. The opposite of it is. So sorrow is not. But those who are the friends of Allah will be removed from sorrow. Imams, the Ahlul Bayt, despite the difficulties, they had that tranquility. Imam Kazim is spending decades in prison, yet he had tranquility. How can we get traditions of the Ahlul Bayt, the next level? We talked about the Quran for a brief moment. But before we get there, I want to answer a question that many people ask. And that's the question I began the lecture with. That is it possible to be happy in this life and in the next? Unfortunately, the same way our concept of money in Islam and wealth in Islam and economics in Islam has been misinformed, the same way our concept of this world is misinformed. Sometimes when people hear lectures, they think that Islam says reject this life, don't work, don't get a job, don't try to do anything, don't get a nice car, don't get a nice home. Surah Baqarah, verse 201 answers that question for you. What is the verse saying? رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. Oh my Lord, give me blessings in this world and in the hereafter. Hasana. Fi dunya hasana wa fil akhirah. If the Quran was against it, why would this verse be there? That Islam would say that don't pray for anything good here, pray for only there. The dua is saying itself that we've made a dua that's a verse of the Quran, is saying very clearly that give me good here. You know, husn is a beautiful word. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. Husn in Islam simultaneously. This is why perhaps Arabic was chosen as the book for the Quran. The depth of meaning. Husn, the root word, it means at the same time beauty, it means at the same time goodness, and at the same time virtue. That the ancient philosophers would say the purpose of life is to live a life of virtue. All three of these are in that. Do you know what Hussein means? What does Hussein mean? Hussein is the first person in the history, our Hussein, Imam Hussein, is the first person in history who was named Hussein. Before him, the name didn't exist. What does his name mean? Hussein, according to the scholars, based on this definition, it means little beauty, little goodness, little virtue. That is Imam al-Hussein's embodiment. If you want happiness in life, follow the life of Hussein. Follow what he did, what he said on the plains of Arafah. and on the plains of Karbala, and on the plains of Medina. I'm not telling you to sacrifice your life. I'm not telling you to sacrifice your family. No, no, no. But I'm telling you this. You can walk on a glimpse, maybe one element of the life of Hussein. And in that, understanding that philosophy, you'll get happiness in your life. You see, there are stages to happiness. You and I are just trying to be happy sometimes for ourselves. We're sometimes just trying to be happy for our own family. But there's another layer. What about being happy for Allah's sake? What about being happy for the Prophet's sake? What about being happy for the Ahlul Bayt's sake? Meaning, doing something to make Allah happy. Doing something to make the Prophet happy. Doing something to make the Ahlul Bayt happy. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says in a tradition that don't think that the one who makes a Muslim brother, remember Epicurus said friend, brother, the same concept in Islam. Your friend is your brother and sister in the modern definition. It's in the meaning. Nonetheless, your brother, the one who makes their brother, Imam Sadiq says, happy, do not think they've only made their brother happy. They have made us, the Ahlul Bayt, happy. They have made the Messenger of Allah happy. And they have made Allah Himself happy. Allah happy. You see, that is a clear indication that we're getting that we are looking for happiness intrinsically, only self-centeredly. That if I get more money, I get a bigger house, I get a bigger car, my family and my core unit will be happy. But Islam's saying, look outward. There's a principle in life, and that principle is this. If you want anything in your life, anything that you want in your life, start to give that thing away. And you'll start to see it come back to you, manifold. This is a Quranic principle, this is an Islamic principle. You want wealth? Well, start giving it. You want knowledge? Start giving it. Whatever little you read, start giving it as much as you can. Whatever you want in life, start giving it. And you'll begin to notice. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, in a beautiful tradition, he says that when someone alleviates the problem of his Muslim brother, and parenthetically, on the side note, sister as well. When someone removes the trial, the tribulation, the difficulty of another believer, no sooner does he do this, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen says, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when that same person who delivers assistance, the person when they go through difficulty, Imam says, when they go through difficulty, Allah helps glide them over that difficulty like water glides over a slope. You know, ever seen water slide down a downward slope? That's how fast Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delivers you from the difficulty. I say this in a time, in an era and environment where in our own communities, I'm speaking globally, wherever you can think of, some of us, and I'll begin with myself sometimes, we need to be honest with ourselves. Rather than trying to bring peace, rather than trying to bring tranquility to the heart of another believer, we're trying to hurt their heart. Is it not true? Then can you imagine how the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam would feel? Can you imagine Rasulullah's face on the Day of Judgment? That I asked you, and I told you, that if you remove hardship, if you remove difficulty from the heart of a believer, Allah will deliver you from your difficulty. And no, here we are cutting each other's feet. Here we are trying to step on each other's toes. Here we are trying to harm our own brethren, our own sisters. How far have we wavered off the goals of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam? And then we ask, we're not happy, we're not tranquil? How will you and I be tranquil when we're not following what the Ahlul Bayt have said? In the era, in the time of the 7th Imam, there's a moment in time where a man who is the follower of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, he had a very large debt in taxes that were due. Now, it was not the time in the environment where, for example, you get income tax returns and things like this. And he was someone who really was not able to give this amount. The ruler who came into power in the city of Rai, remember, Rai is modern day Tehran area. When he came to power, there was rumors that maybe he's a or maybe he's not. It was an era and time of heavy taqiyya. It was an era and time where you could not be open about your belief system. He said, I don't know. Some people said he's a Shia. But if he went to this ruler and said that I have this need and I'm a Shia, and he was not a follower of the Shia, the ruler that is, of that area of right, then his head would be severed. His head would be chopped off. So he was a very difficult situation. Do I go and say that I'm a Shia and I put my life on the line or not? He decided to go to Hajj with the intention of meeting Imam al-Kazim there. When he went to Hajj and when he went to meet he met Imam al-Kazim there. He went towards the tent where Imam al-Kazim alayhi salam was there, before the imprisonment of Imam al-Kazim, of course. He says, Salaamu alaykum, wa alaykum as-salam. At that moment in time, he says, Yabna Rasulillah, I'm a follower of yours, I'm a Shia of yours. He says, I know. He says, I have a request. He says, what's the request? He says, I have a huge debt that I owe in the form of taxes, and I don't have the money. I'm going through a very difficult time. He says, what's the issue? He says, I've heard the ruler there, he's someone who's a follower of you, but I don't know. Is there any way you can assist me? Is there any way you can help me? Imam smiled. He began to write a letter, Imam al-Kazim alayhi salam. He says, I am sending this letter, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, I am sending this letter. Know that there in Jannah, under the arsh of Allah, the throne of Allah, metaphorical throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the shade of it, there is a particular vicinity. This vicinity is a VIP area, my words, not the hadith word. It's a special area, it's a VIP area. For who? For the one who alleviates and removes from the heart of another believer. This person who has brought you the letter is one of those brothers of yours. Wassalamu alaikum. He closed it, he said, take this back with you. He says, thank you, Ibn Rasulullah. He goes back. When he goes back to the city, he goes to the governor's palace. When he goes to the governor's palace at that point in time, he says, I have a letter from Imam al-Kazim alayhi salam, and I would like you to deliver it to the ruler. At this point in time, the message was sent to the governor. When the message was sent to the governor at that point in time, he says, the tradition says the governor came out without his shoes. He came to the door and he greeted the guest and he said, come in, come to the gate. He says, come inside. He hugged him. He took the letter. He kissed the letter. He opened the letter. He says, Salaamu alaykum, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Salaamu alaykum. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, under the arsh of Allah, there is a special location, a special section that is reserved for those who help that brother who is suffering. Allah gives them that status. He says, the person who has brought you this letter is one of those people. He kissed the letter, closed the letter. He says, I have this much property. The governor says, I have this much belonging. He says, I take this, I'm giving you half of all my wealth, I'm giving you half of all my clothes, and those things that cannot be divided in half, I will give you the monetary equivalent of it. He gives this, he said, are you satisfied? He says, I'm satisfied. He goes back, he smiles. The next year, he says, I need to tell this to Imam al-Kazim. It's not the era of technology. So where does he go? He says, 1 year later, he goes to Hajj again. When he goes to Hajj, he goes to the tent of Imam al-Kazim alayhi salam. Alaikum wa alaikum salam. What happened? He says, you remember, Ya Imam, you gave me that letter? He said, yes. He says, I gave it to the governor. What did he do? He said, he gave me this and this and this. And as he was saying, the narration says, as he was telling the Imam's face was brightening up. And he says, the one who pleases us, Imam al-Kazim says, it is as if he pleases the one who pleases their brother, it's as if they please us. The one who pleases us is as if he pleases the Prophet. And whoever pleases the Prophet, it is as if he pleases Allah. My dear brothers and sisters, fill the hearts of your Muslim brothers, your sisters, fill their hearts with tranquility. Don't fill their hearts with animosity. Don't fill their hearts. Don't try to look at someone and say, they did this wrong, and they did this wrong, and they did that wrong, and they're evil. Give benefit of the doubt. Islam says 70 benefits of the doubt. We give 70 in the opposite direction. We say, oh, like all the evidence is in favor of the person. We try to find 70 arguments against. Why? This heart will never find tranquility. When you do this, you suffer yourself. Mandela says, bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping it kills the other person. That's what happens when you live in a state of bitterness. It helps no one. There are other darajat in Jannah. You know, we want VIP in the hotel, we want VIP in the world. Everyone has this wish. Jannah also has VIP sections. What are they? Rasul al-Azam has a tradition in which he says, in Jannah there is a location called Darul. Remember I said one of the words in Quran for happiness is farah. Darul Farah, this is the house of happiness. No one will enter it except the one who brings happiness to the heart of an orphan. You want happiness? Help others. Help orphans. Because that orphan's been deprived of happiness. They don't have the love of a mother. They don't have the love of a father. You want happiness? Go there. Imam Amir al-Mu'min on his deathbed is saying, Allah, Allah fil aitam, Allah, Allah fil masakin. The most final moments of his life, he's saying, never forget the orphan and never forget the poor. A principle for life. You want happiness? Give. On a scientific level, I've told you many times before, 3 things in your life. Develop them, you'll never be devoid of happiness. Humility, generosity, and gratitude. The person who's grateful, if you have gratitude in your heart, try this in your life. If you have gratitude while you're being grateful, you can never have 2 emotions simultaneously. You can never be grateful and angry, and you can never be grateful and fearful. It's the cure to the biggest problems in life. Gratefulness, shukr, is what we learn from the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Tonight we turn our hearts and our minds to the people who are the utmost height of spirituality and the height of happiness. Happiness not in the sense of hedonism, happiness in the sense of tranquility of heart, peace of heart. A man comes to the Imam, he says, Yabna Rasulillah, what is the biggest ornament of life? What is the biggest zina of life? What is the thing that if Allah gives a person that, given them the best gift that you can get on this planet, in this life? He says, if Allah gives, the Imam says, if Allah gives someone a son, and he sees that son in front of him grow up, and he becomes a pious, muttaqi person. By the way, I don't want anyone to get the wrong message. The Imam is saying this in the context of the question that was asked, and the time in the Zaman and Makan. Remember, Islam was the rights and the position of the daughter is very elevated. I don't want anyone to get the wrong message, but these are the words of the tradition. He says, if Allah gives someone a son, and he raises up and he gets older and he becomes a teenager, 18, this age, and he's a pious, good person, and when people see that person in society, they say, what wonderful parents he has, what wonderful family he has, what wonderful tarbiyah he has. Know that Allah is giving you the greatest gift. He says, Ya Rasulullah, what's the greatest trial? What's the greatest tribulation? What's the greatest difficulty? That if Allah gives someone this test on this planet, it's as if it's the greatest test. It's if Allah, Imam says, if Allah, you know this, the first case, that first son who has been given, who's pious, that same son, if he's taken away in this life while the parents are alive, that's the greatest test for an individual. Allahu Akbar. Aliyun al-Akbar. Ali ibn al-Husayn ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. You know, Aliyun al-Akbar was that individual who had a very special place in the heart of his father. You see, a child has a very special place by default. But this is the son of Hussein and the heart of Hussein. We're told there's a moment in time where there's a qafila, a caravan that comes from a rural village. This qafila, this caravan that comes from a rural village, it goes towards Karbala on a Thursday night, much like the Thursday night of tonight. They get to Karbala. When they get to Karbala, they say that, you know, when you go for the ziyarah, you want to recite some nawha, you want to recite some marsiya, you want to recite some masaib to remember and commemorate the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. One man comes forward and they say, what shall we recite? He says, recite masaib. He begins to recite on a Thursday night in the haram of Sayyid al-Shuhada. He begins to recite the masaib of who? He begins to recite the masaib and the musibah of Aliyun al-Akbar, the son of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. He begins to recite the musibah of Aliyun al-Akbar. He recites how he left the camps, how he got the permission, how he went towards the battlefield, how he fought courageously, how did Hussein take care of him. Ajrukum ala Allah, ajrukum ala Allah. My dear brothers and sisters, there's an argument in Judaism. What's the argument? That they talk about the sacrifice of Abraham. Ibrahim alayhi salam, Khalilullah, the friend of Allah. They also believe that he gave a sacrifice of his son. But they analyze the levels. They say Abraham's level is very exalted, but he didn't give one other level of sacrifice. What would happen if Ibrahim was asked not to sacrifice his son, but asked to sacrifice his grandson? Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. At that moment in time, they recite the musibah. When they recite the musibah, that night the caravan goes to sleep. When the caravan goes to sleep, they all see a dream that night. When they see this dream that night, they hear and they see Abu Abdullah Sayyid al-Shuhada come in their dream. When Sayyid al-Shuhada comes into the dream, at that point in time, he comes into the dream and he says, "Oh my Shia, I want to let you know a few things. There is this person who is in your village. When you go back to there, he is the one who looks after the shoes of my Azadar. Give him my salams." And he says, give some more nasiha, some more advice. And he says, "Oh my Shia, I tell you just one thing. On a Thursday night in my haram, do not recite the musibah of Aliun al-Akbar." They said, "Mawla, why?" He said, "Recite it any other night. Recite it on another night, but not Thursday night." Why? He says, "Because Thursday night, my mother Fatima al-Zahra, she comes from my ziyarah from Medina. As soon as you recited the musibah Ali Akbar, my mother Fatima al-Zahra, she has been unconscious." أجركم على الله. أجركم على الله. That was Ibrahim. The Quran says, وَفَضَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ. Ibrahim, we took the sacrifice and we did not give it to you. We passed it down to future generations. Who is this generation that's giving the ultimate sacrifice? أجركم على الله. أجركم على الله. We come to the plains of Karbala. When we come to the plains of Karbala, we are told that when Abu Abdullah's son, Ali al-Akbar, he sees that the enemy on the other side, they are killing companion after companion. "Father, give me the permission to go towards the battlefield. Give me the ability, the right to go." Imam al-Hussein says, "My son, before me, you have to ask a few more people." "Ya Imam, who do I need to ask?" "My father." He says, "First go and tell the people who have a right over you." "Who?" Sayyid ibn Tawus says, he says that he goes towards the tent and he first goes towards his mother Layla and says, "My mother, do you give me the permission to go towards the battlefield?" Imagine the heart of a mother, the child that she has brought up from a young age, and that to a child like Ali al-Akbar. She cries, she hugs Ali Akbar. Allah knows how the mother and the son separated. Ajrukum ala Allah. They say, who was the next person? The next person was Sayyida Zainab, the sister of Imam al-Hussein. Why? Because she raised Ali Akbar as if he was her own son. He goes, "My Aunt Zainab, I am going to defend my father. Do you give me the permission? Do you give me the right?" And they say at that point in time, she was so close. She didn't do this with Aun and Muhammad, her own sons, but Ali al-Akbar. He was the son of Hussein. She says, "My child, how do I let you go?" Ali says, "My mother very well, or my aunt very well. Don't stay where you are. However, don't give me the permission, but just tell me the answer to one question." "What's that question, my son Ali Akbar? What will you say to my grandmother on the day when she asks that Hussein needed him? You didn't give him the permission." Ajrukum Allah, ajrukum Allah. Who's the next one? He says he had to bid farewell to Imam Sajjad, Imam Zainul Abidin. These brothers were too close. They were so close. Miranis also in the Maqtal says that when it came to the separation of Imam Sajjad and Ali al-Akbar, he says to Fidda, "Bhai ka nahi kuch, ye rukhsat hai Nabi ki, hum aap chalenge ke ziyarat hai Nabi ki." That Ali al-Akbar resembled the Holy Prophet in every way. How did Imam Sajjad and Ali Akbar separate? Ajrukum ala Allah, ajrukum ala Allah. Finally, they say when Ali Akbar was in the tents, he was trying to leave. Every time he was trying to leave, the tent door would open and it was closed. It would open and it would close, one after the other. Imam Hussein is watching this. What's happening? They say that every time Akbar tried to leave, someone caught Ali Akbar, don't go. Ali Akbar, don't go. Up until Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he goes himself. He takes Akbar by the hand. He brings him out of the tent. Ajrukum ala Allah, ajrukum ala Allah. At that point, when he brings Akbar out of the tent, he brings Akbar towards the horse. When Akbar comes towards the horse, it was the tradition that they would put a turban on the head. The same way Qasim had a turban, and the other marchers, they had a turban, and you would dress the person up for the battle. When you would dress the person up for the battle, at that point, Imam puts the turban on the head of Ali al-Akbar. He helps him onto the horse. At that point in time, the Imam says to Ali Akbar, he says, Akbar, do your father one final favor. He says, my father, what? As long as you are going towards the battlefield, stop and look back at me every time. Allahu Akbar. This is the heart of a father. He says, my father, what is the matter? He says, just listen to what I'm saying. Ali al-Akbar, he goes towards the battlefield. He looks back towards his father. Imam al-Hussein is looking at him. And then he goes and proceeds. After a few moments, the narration says that Akbar hears some footsteps behind him. Because at that point, what was he hearing? First, Imam Hussein calls out and he looks towards the heavens. He says, Allahumma shhad ala ha'ula al-qawm. He says, oh Allah, bear witness that I am on this nation. I am sending who? The one who khalqan wa khuliqan wa mantiqa. In every way, the way he walks, the way he talks, in every way, he resembles your messenger, Muhammad. Whenever after Rasulullah, we would want to do the ziyarah of Rasulullah, we would look at Ali al-Akbar. That's who I'm sending towards the battlefield. Ajrukum ala Allah. When he heard the footsteps, he says, Baba, you let me go. You gave me permission. Why are you following me now? He says, Akbar, Imam says, Akbar, if you had a son like you would know what's going through my heart. Akbar, how am I to let you go towards the battlefield? Akbar goes and Akbar calls out and he says the rajahas, the announcement of the declaration towards the army. It was the tradition that when you come in front of the enemy, you will announce who you are. He says, Ana Ali ibn al-Husayn ibn Ali, nahnu wa baytullah awla bin nabi, at'amukum min rum hatta yanthani. He recites poetry. He says, know who I am. I am Ali ibn al-Husayn ibn Ali, and I will strike you. And he goes on for a long raj'ahs. I'm leaving it. He begins to strike one after the other. And they say he fights in the truest sense like a Haidari. He fights in the truest sense like a Husseini, like his father and grandfather. And he finishes off enemy after enemy up until the point that the narration says that he stopped. And when he stopped, he came back. He came back to the tents. He goes to his father. May Allah should never show any father this day. Allah. He says, my father, the thirst is killing me. The thirst is killing me. If I had one drop of water, I would show them whose son I am. I would show them whose grandson I am. But the thirst is getting to me. Allahu Akbar. The water was not there in the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada. They say he took his ring off. Imam takes the ring and he puts it in the mouth of Ali al-Akbar. He says, Akbar, may your grandfather quench your thirst from Kawthar, my son. But before you go, your mother is on the musalla in the tent. Go meet her. Ajrukum Allah, ajrukum Allah. Ali al-Akbar, he goes towards the tent to meet his mother for the last time. Allahu Akbar. May Allah never show any mother this day. He goes into the tent. He says, my mother. She sees him and he's been fighting very courageously. She hugs Akbar and they hug for a moment. He says, my mother, do you give me the permission to go back? My son, how do I let you go back? They say he reminded made her a Fatima al-Zahra. She went into sujood. He went back towards the battlefield. He fought very courageously. He fought enemy after enemy. But that one moment came where they surrounded Akbar. They ambushed Akbar. They struck him. He fell from the horse. And when he fell from the horse towards the ground, let no father see this day. This is the ultimate imtihan. According to the Imam, his son falls towards the ground. Imam runs. Mir Anis in his poetry 150 years ago captures this moment. He says, Beta pukaro phir ke basarat mein farq hai, ain noor ain jism ki taqat mein farq hai, zakhmi hai qalb ruh ki rahat mein farq hai, tum ye na janiyo ke mohabbat mein farq hai, zakhm mein jigar mila tumhe godi mein paal ke, zakhm mein jigar mila tumhe godi mein paal के किसको दिखाऊं अपना कलेजा निकाल के Ali Akbar, who should I show my heart to? Who should I show my liver to? Do you know what's going in your father's chest right now? He gets to the body of Ali ibn al-Akbar. I heard a scholar reciting the Musibah of Sayyid al-Shuhada. He said, where is the heart of Sayyid al-Shuhada? But when he lost his son himself, he says, then I understood why Sayyid al-Shuhada said I couldn't see. Because it's literally as if your eyes give way, you become blind. They say Sayyid al-Shuhada, he was going left and right, falling on the ground, going to Ali Akbar. Anis doesn't stop there. He gives the perspective of Ali Akbar. What does he say? नागाह सदाई आई के बाबा इधर हूँ मैं, ए नखले बाग फातिमा ज़ेरे शजर हूँ मैं, खालिक से लौ लगी है चरागे सहर हूँ मैं, जल्द आइए कि आपका प्यारा पिसर हूँ मैं, जख्म जिगर कहीं न अजल का बहाना हो, जख्म जिगर कहीं न अजल का बहाना हो, दीदार देख ले तो मुसाफिर रवाना हो. He gets to Ali Akbar. Ajrukum Allah, give your tears for the Ahlul Bayt tonight. The ultimate sacrifice. But he notices what? Imam Hussein, when he gets to Akbar, I know it's very difficult to cry continuously. This crying continuously is the most difficult thing. This is the job of the Ahlul Bayt, to cry continuously from Karbala to Kufa to Sham. Ajrukum Allah. Imam Hussein sees Ali Akbar, but he's covering his chest. Imam sees him, and he sees Ali Akbar in a state where he's smiling and a state where he's crying. At that point in time, he says, Akbar, tell me, what's this? Why is your hand covering your chest? He says, Father, do not worry about this. He says, why are you smiling? And why are you crying? He says, I'm smiling because I see my grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen. I see Rasulullah. He says, why are you crying? Why are you crying? He says, whenever you cry, my grandmother Fatima al-Zahra strikes her face. She begins to cry. That's why I'm crying. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he removes the hand of Akbar from his chest. He says, Akbar, what has happened to you? A lance had gone into the chest of Ali al-Akbar. The mace had gone so deep. He says, my father, the pain. At that point in time, it's a father, what is he to do? Ali al-Akbar is between life and death. He cannot take it anymore. The pain is killing him. He says, my father, assist me. Imam Hussein takes the lance. He faces Najaf. He says, Ya Ali. He removes it. A fountain of blood emerges from Ali al-Akbar. Ajrukum ala Allah, ajrukum ala Allah. They say that Imam Hussein couldn't take the body of Ali Akbar. According to the Maqtal in Arabic, they say he couldn't lift it because it was a father. He said, oh children of Banu Hashim, take the body of your brother, for I cannot see anymore, and I cannot lift this body. But I ask, if this is the riwayah, I don't know which body was heavier, Ali Akbar or a 6-month-old Ali Asghar. Allah. اجرکم علی اللہ. 2 منٹ مصائب کے سن لیجئے. کہتے ہیں جب یہ قافلہ روانہ ہوا اور یہ قافلہ کربلا سے کوفہ، کوفہ سے شام تلک گیا، شام کے بازار میں تمام سر شہداء کوہ سنا پر ایک ایک بی بی دیکھ رہی تھی اور شام کے تماشائی دیکھ رہے تھے. ایک بی بی دیکھ رہی تھی حسرت سے، اور ایک خاتون نے دیکھا اور اس نے جم کے دیکھا ایک چہرے کو، اور بی بی نے آئی اور کہا اے خاتون اتنا بتا دے کہ تو اس شکل اس صورت کو کیوں دیکھ رہی ہے ایسے. اس نے کہا کہ میں یہ سوچ رہی ہوں کہ یہ اتنا خوبصورت جوان، یہ اتنا خوبصورت جوان اور سر نو کے سنا پر، میرے دل میں بس ایک دعا ہے. بی بی دعا کیا ہے؟ خاتون بتا دعا کیا ہے؟ دعا اتنی سی ہے کہ جب اس کی شہادت ہوئی ہو، اس کی ماں زندہ نہ ہو، لالا نے ماتم کیا نہ کہو یہ میرا لخت جگر علی اکبر، یہ میرا لخت جگر علی اکبر ہے. صلی اللہ علیہ یا رسول، صلی اللہ علیہ یا امیر المؤمنین، صلی اللہ علیہ یا فاطمة الزہرا سیدۃ النساء، صلی اللہ علیہ یا حسن المصطفى. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Ya Allah, anyone who has a hajat by the wasl and wasila of Ali al-Akbar, by the wasl and wasila of Sayyid al-Shuhada, by the wasl and wasila of Fatima al-Zahra, grant them their hajat in this night. Anyone who's going through a difficult financial time, a health crisis, Ya Allah, remove this pandemic from our world, and Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Imam Sahib al-Asr al-Zaman, and allow us to be amongst his companions when he returns. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. معتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين. علی اکبر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر ارمان تب ہے ناؤں کی پوشاک شہانی افسوس کے رسائی نہ تجھ کو یہ جوانی کیسا تھا مقدر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر اتنا تو ذرا ٹھہرو تمہیں دولہا بنا دوں پھر ایک جھلک سحر کی سغرا کو دکھا لوں بے چین تھی خواہر ہائے ہائے
وہ گے سو والا ہے میرا خون میں نہایا یہ کیا ہوا دل پر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر کہتی تھی یہ ماں خوں بری میت سے لپٹ کر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر ماں تیری جدائی میں بھلا کیسے جیے گی مر جائے گی سغرا جو خبر تیری سنے گی اب کیا کروں جی کر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر کرتی تھی زیارت میں پیمبر کی تجھی سے اب گئے میں کسے دوں گی میں تشبیہ نبی سے ہم شکل پیمبر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر تم ہچکیاں لے لے کے جو دم توڑ رہے ہو موما سے ہمیشہ کے لیے موڑ رہے ہو کیوں روتے ہو دل بر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر کہتی تھی یہ ماں خوں بری میت سے لپٹ کر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر جب کوئی جوان لاش نظر آئی ہے محشر ایک یاد سوئے کرب و بلا جاتی ہے محشر دل روتا ہے کہہ کر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر کہتی تھی یہ ماں خوں بری میت سے لپٹ گئی ہائے ہائے علی اکبر ہائے ہائے علی اکبر صلوات اللہ محمد وعلى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل سورة مباركة الفاتحة
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، خصوصا سيدي ومولاي أبو الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا قصة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس ونيس النفوس، أيها المدفون بأرض القدس الراضي بالقدر والقضاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام عليك
الإنس والجان عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Brothers and sisters, inshallah, we did Ziyarat as well as we'll also be continuing with Ziyarat al-Warisa during the Thursday night. We'll also continue with Ziyarat al-Warisa.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم وصفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح النبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وطاعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سميت بذلك فرزيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مظلمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرزي الزكي الحادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والأروة الوثقى والهجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبيا بكم موقن بشراع ديني وخواتيم عملي وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وعمري لعمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سميت بذلك فرزيت به. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباء. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الزكي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما. فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأهوتهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم الأخ المواصي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر، والأخ الدافع النقي المجيب إلى طاعة الرب الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. السلام عليكم يا شهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا، كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان، الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.